The other thing I'd like to point out is that whether we do renovate for 1.5 or 1.7 million or 1.2 million, why in the world would we spend 1.5 million on this place? When if you look around, everything that's been described to be done is structural. It's in the roof, it's in the ceiling, it's in the walls, it's in the windows. This is going to look the same. We're going to spend 1.5 million. We're still going to have these columns. We're still going to have a low ceiling, no additional stage area, no raised roof. You know, I asked the engineer, am I correct in that statement that the renovations, physically, we're going to see the same building here when it's all done?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
So, you know, why would we spend 1.7 million and still walk in here? And if you came back in 5 years, you wouldn't know anything had ever been done, because it's all in the roof and the walls and all the structural issues that are being addressed, other than some ADA stuff that might be in. Maybe it's a sprinkler system, which, let me just address the sprinkler system. Everybody is always, you know, all the cost of a sprinkler system. We need a sprinkler system. If you're ever in here with a dance and a fire breaks out and you're going to get trampled and burned up like you see in some of these other clubs around here, you wish we'd had a sprinkler system in this building. I mean, I can't understand why anybody would argue against a sprinkler system in this building when we have this many people in here, and look at the exit doors you've got. So it's needed if something ever happens. You say, well, fire's never going to happen. You know, we have thunderstorms. Lightning can strike this building any time and set a fire up there in the roof, and nobody ever know it. It was already too late. So we've got all those issues to think about. The other thing is, and I'm almost finished, is that the point of the only reason I can think anybody would be opposed to replacing this building would be the cost or the funding or the money. And as Dennis just pointed out, the money, we've already got the money, we're going to do the loan. Your maintenance fee is going to change very minimal. As Dennis mentioned, maybe 10% or something, whether we replace or don't replace. It is not going to cost you any more, or 10% at most, and may not cost you as much, because if the building is repaired and is not replaced, when the next reserve study is done in 2 years from now, this building's only going to still have a useful life of maybe 15 or 20 years. So now you've got to move a new clubhouse. For those of you that don't understand how the reserve study works, I apologize for that, but I'm just telling you reality of what's going to happen. The clubhouse now gets moved 20 years out, and now it's going to be a $6 million clubhouse, and we have to start collecting money in the reserve study to pay for a $6 million clubhouse in 20 years down the road. So your maintenance fees are not going to be affected very much. So I'll just end with these 2 points. When, you know, like I said, why spend $1.5 million and it's going to look just like this when you're done? And the other one is, if you're opposed to it because you think you can't afford it, the maintenance fee is not going to change that much whether you do it or don't do it. That's
I forgot what I was going to say. Name's called Road 763. My question is, what happens in the meantime when you build this new building? What are we going to be doing for all the activities we have today, which we are paying for, the rooms we use? How long will it take? When is it going to start? How long would it take? And what we have in the meantime, where are we going to park, where are we going to go? Do you have those in consideration?
Can we pull that project chart back up?
Huh?
Can we pull that project chart back up, that little bar we did?
No, not here. Those are good questions, and they're not things that we haven't considered. We haven't resolved everything, but we're considering, because that was also come into play cost-wise. Now, and there is a building committee formed, and one of the first duties of that building committee will be to investigate what our options are for golf, shuffleboard, social activities, and associated costs, and what happens with materials we want to maintain or keep out of this building. I think the golf course, we've got a reasonable solution in that we move the golf operation, the starter function, over behind number 4 hole. There's that grass area that we can turn into. Number 5 becomes number 1. We fence off this area from a safety standpoint. It gets people away from the construction area. Perhaps even we allow the contractor to use our current golf shack as a construction trailer in order to maybe save a couple bucks. I think that can be done. I think, as far as iPod or pods, we're going to have to probably do some storage. There has been discussion on, the biggest thing I think is the social activities. I think we will sacrifice some social activities. However, we can try to accommodate as many as we can. And part of that is we arrange the construction period so that we only miss one season. So we'll start in the summer, construct during the first season, and then we would finish up the next summer so the place would be available for resident use the following season. So I think we can work something out that. There may be a way of expediting those costs. Those are just rough things because, again, as you're aware, anytime you get into construction, there's always seems to be delays because of unknown conditions. You got strikes, you got material deliveries and different things. There has been some talk, although nothing resolved, about can we use the shuffleboard facility for some of our social functions? This disrupts some of those activities, but we could put a temporary floor in there and hold some things. I think we will curtail for a season some activities or eliminate. We can go off-site to some facilities, to some places. There are schools that have offered their facility, and they offered to bus us there. But there's a cost associated with that and inconvenience. You're not going to build a new facility without having some inconvenience, and we all will have that. But it's a good question, and it's things we need to get resolved.
I'm Skip Metz from 214. I was curious, has anybody thought about the additional value we'll be adding to the park with a new facility? This is an asset. It's not like we're throwing away $4 million, and each one of us is a landowner here, or we have a value proposition in the property, and it would seem like this would improve the value of each of our shares of the corporation or the company. So from that perspective, it might be a pretty good investment.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah,
Okay, here in the back.
Wayne Hawes, 177. It was 4 of us that called a meeting in January about the clubhouse situation. Almost 3 years ago, we talked to the president of the board, not Steve at that time, and asked a simple question as what it would cost to repair this clubhouse as to build a new one. At that time, repair was taken clear off the table. It wasn't even, we are not going to repair it. We are either going to alterate the building by building higher ceilings and partitions and moving the stage out back, or we're going to build a new one. And the cost associated between those two associated that it would be smarter to build a new one. But how much would it cost to repair this building? We never, ever, ever got an inkling because that's not on the table. So in 2013, the Biller study said that if you would throw $250,000 into repairing this building, it would make the building last out to 20 years. Now, we have a cost estimate of $720,000 to repair the building, and with additional costs. We have a cost estimate of a new building based on Wanamaker and projected percentages on from that future to somewhere around 3.8, and additional costs maybe 4.2, and overruns towards 5 million. All right, all right. Not, we won't do the 5. We'll go to 4.2. Do you want to fix the building for, well, this is good. This is good. Do you want to fix the building for $1 million, or build a new one for 4?
Those are incorrect numbers. It's 1.8 versus 3.8.
1.8 versus 3.8. That's a good number. Now, in order to get rid of all the rumblings, I would suggest that the park get the vote on it. A secret ballot in next February's shareholder meeting. A ballot should be sent to everybody in the park, every shareholder, and you get to vote. It's a substantial difference in opinion, one that should be solved by vote. In order to borrow, in order to go in debt and put everybody under subject. Okay, in order to go in debt and put every shareholder in debt, every shareholder should have a vote in that debt. I would suggest that under statute 719 out of Tallahassee, that they're even saying that 2/3 of a vote has to go towards material alteration of the building. I just think it's up to vote. We asked 3 years ago for a survey of this building, and we've never ever gotten one. What's our opinions? That's all it was. We always asked for what was the cost to fix the building, what was the cost to build a new, and to survey us. And that's what we'd like to see.
Okay, I think we have someone in the back. Jan?
I'm sorry, Jan Wallace, 308. I was going to address the question, the gentleman up front, I think, that talked about closing down the clubhouse for activities. If we were to replace it, we would have to close down activities whether we replaced it or repaired it. And yeah, and so, I mean, we have enough ingenuity. We've had street parties before. We've had all kinds of activities, and I'm sure the people here would still have their social activities one way or another, whether we decided to replace it or to tear it down and repair it or replace it, either one. So I turn it over to Steve now.
Well, you're right. A little clarification on the presentation that we just heard from Wayne.
Yeah, give me your unit number.
384, Steve Van de Sand. The Wanamaker Jensen that Steve spent report that Steve spent a lot of time on has been available since 2009 and been gone over in detail. The first estimate in that was to repair without structural. What happened was that the Florida legislature, between 2009 when that was put together and 2013, came up with a requirement that this building would have to be retrofitted with a sprinkler system by the end of this year, 2019. And that was always in place, which took off the table the opportunity for us to just do repairs. The number was always available, and if Wayne had gone to meetings, he would have heard it. So that was a little bit nasty, but the supposition that he wouldn't give it to him wasn't very good isn't true at all. So what happened in June of last year is the legislature in Florida took that requirement and rescinded it. So we do not have to retrofit. In order to invoke the sprinkler requirement, other than common sense, it would take structural modification, which we just heard was what we need to do to this building, a structural modification. And when we do, we have to invoke all the other things like ADA and fire. So the number has always been there, it's always been referred to, but it got taken off the table because of legislature changes to the requirements for a cooperative building of this size, which required the sprinkling system. So that's the reason that we didn't consider it 3 years ago, Wayne, is because it wasn't viable. Until June of last year, it became viable again. Okay? So that is the reason. And the two things are, one is with structure, and if it's direct replacement, and the reason for that is the structure is going to invoke all of the codes that we have to make, then what we have is no requirement for a vote. It's maintenance, and that's a very clear interpretation. If we want a new building, we're going to reconfigure, have a larger hall, and we're going to put things over in different places, and we're going to make it look a lot different. That requires 2/3 vote. And in Florida, in cooperative law, 719, there are no secret ballots, period, except for the election of officers, directors. And that one is also very clear. So for us to not be open like we are today isn't permitted in the state of Florida. So those are the comments that I would make and add to that, and that would be the end of what I have.
Steve, we got one over here, Steve.
Okay, fire away.
Hello, I'm John Hagan. I'm in lot 44. With all the numbers and presentation you were doing, I got a little confused. And if you do a new building, does that include the kitchen and air conditioning? And it sounded like the retrofit the structure did not include the air conditioning or the kitchen. Now, is that correct, or is it seems like that gap could tighten a little bit if the gap between a new one and a retrofit could tighten a little bit if you start adding the air conditioner or the kitchen in it.
So just to clarify, when you gave that estimate 1.4 to 1.8, it did not include, to your point, it did not include the major HVAC changes, kitchen required, no paint resurfacing on the exterior, et cetera, because we just don't have a way to get that number that's tight enough to include in it. So to your point, yeah, that 1.4, 1.8 is probably in the low end. We don't know how much though, 2%, 10%, half, but you're right.
Is that included in the brand new building?
Yes. Yeah. They gave us an allowance of a couple $100,000 for furniture, fixtures, kitchen equipment, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Anne Frampton, 620. I have a question. Since 2013 up until 2018, every shareholder has paid $50 a month and more towards the clubhouse. That equates to $2.7 million as of the end of 18. According to the last figures we received, that money isn't there. Where is it?
So there's been a lot of confusion around our reserves, and I try to clarify it every time we have a reserve study, discussion, et cetera. We'll try again. Our reserves are pooled. Under Florida law, all of our reserve money goes into one big maintenance pot. Under Florida law, if I put money to a reserve for clubhouse and then money into a reserve for roads and lights and et cetera, if I need more that's in there, it's got to go to a vote and an assessment. So when we set up the park, we did not put that in that way. It's a pooled reserve. That's number one. That's why you don't see line items, number one. Number two, we've been spending hundreds of thousands of dollars as we go as well. So to say that we've been putting $50 a month specifically for the clubhouse isn't exactly a correct statement. Your fees have gone up, to help get the reserve up where it needs to be for funding purposes, because at one point we were only 30% funded, and what that means is the analysis says at some point you should have $2 million in your reserve to cover fixing things like a savings account you would have at your home. We only had 30% of that. So we strived to get that percent funded in the 50 to 55% range, which mitigates the risk of assessment should an all crap happen and we got to do a major repair. So I'm afraid that that's not an apples to oranges question.
With continuing on, with every budget that we receive, on the bottom line, there's always been that $50 is in place of a special assessment. So how much of the reserve that we have now belongs to the clubhouse?
I can't tell you that because we don't bookkeep it that way, number one. Number two, that clause is in every budget vote because under Florida law, if we, the shareholders, so I'll give you an example. This year we entered the year at 50%, 57% funded. So I'm going to use really round numbers. We need to have $2.5 million in our reserves to be fully funded. We only had $1.5 million. So if we had decided not to partially fund the reserves, we would have taken an assessment of $1 million divided by 751 to bring it up to snuff. So every year there's a legal requirement for the shareholders to vote not to fully fund the reserve requirement. As far as the money going into the reserve, here again, it's to cover the funds you need to redo maintenance and repair. This year we're going to spend over $800,000. So technically, frankly, it's very possible the starting reserve balance is going to be higher than the ending reserve balance this year by a couple $100,000 because we're spending $350,000, $400,000 on road repairs that we've been kicking down the road since, well, 4 years ago. So I guess my point is you really can't look at the components that make up the reserve. You've got to look at the reserve savings in a whole. I don't know how else to explain it. John, you want to...
Over this way, Steve.
Right here. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Nuttall, 456. Just a couple questions. One, thanks, Dennis, for the work on your estimates on the maintenance fee. But at the back of the room, we can't see any of those numbers. I just wondered if that might be available along with the assumptions on the website so we could try to educate ourselves a little bit.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful.
So let me give it to you in a nutshell. Reserves. Good Lord, I need a drink. Maintenance fees went up $100 a month in the last 10 years. They're going up $100 a month in the next 10 years.
Okay. I'd just like to see.
Yeah, no, we'll put it out there. No
I'd just like to see how you got there. It would help me anyways. I've only been here 3 years, so when I bought here, I was told new clubhouse, $4 million, $2 million is going to come from the reserve, the other would be funded through a loan. The reserve hasn't changed all that much in the last 3 years. It's $1.5 million now. You got $800,000 going in. You're going to spend $800,000 out of the reserve this year. At the end of this year, this time next year, the reserve is going to be $1.4 million, right? Approximately, based on what's in the budget, right? So my only concern is if you're moving forward, I realize you got a tough decision to make, right? You're going to repair, you're going to replace. I understand all that. If you get to the replace, and if it's $4 million, 3.8 I think is what you said, and if you're really serious about getting 50% of that out of the reserve, I'm a little confused as to how you're going to get there. And you know, you're going to spend it this year. Does that mean you're not going to spend anything on upgrades or improvements or infrastructure for the next 2 years? Because I think what I heard was the board was on track to fund 50% of the replacement building by 2021. So, you know, we've only got a couple years left. So that's my question.
I'll take a swing at that. The 50-50 has been a guideline. When we decide to pull the trigger to replace, if that's the path we decide to go down, we will take as much money out of the reserves as we possibly can and keep it solvent for the future repairs, and we'll need to get a loan for the rest. If you looked at the reserve study, the years after clubhouse replacement, our spend is only going to be $250,000 here, $250,000 there every year. because most of the major stuff has been done, right? We spent millions on sewers, we're going to spend several hundred thousand on roads, et cetera. So you'll be contributing more than you'll be spending out of that. So that answers the 50-50. It was a guideline. We're going to get as close as we can. When the finance committees in the past years looked at that, to get to 50-50, as well as hit that timeline, we would have been talking probably a little more significant increases than we decided were palatable. I remember 2 years ago we were looking at an $85 reserve contribution for the year, and we ended up compromising it back down to $70 because we thought a $30 jump in a maintenance fee was going to be a little hard to swallow. So we're always playing a balancing act between, and my primary purpose in the reserves, my primary goal that I look at is based on our reserve studies, which we contract out, and they say, look at every asset we have, and they say your savings account should be X. So back to my $2.5 million number. Your savings account should be X to save enough so when you need to spend it down the road, you're going to build up to that level. My goal is to keep us at least 55%. So that mitigates our risk. That's an industry risk number. That mitigates our risk of having to come back to you and say, hey, we didn't spend the $300,000 on the road. We don't have it in the budget. I need an assessment. So I look at it in the total. We will always have expenses that weren't necessarily in the plan in the year. We had a couple thousand of that this year. And we as the board balance that out. We had a budget of $800,000 this year to spend. If we have something comes up that's $100,000 we didn't plan on it, we are going to need to talk about pulling something out of $100,000 and maybe pushing the next year. So we're always balancing that. It just isn't as specific as I think a lot of us would like it to be. And that probably was more confusing than it helped, but.
Hi, Denis Regimbal, 390. You were talking about the replacement, 3.8 million. 2 questions. One, how sure are you of that price? Because you said you don't have any plans, like per se. So how sure you're not going to go over by, 1 or 2 million?
0.6. I'm trying to be funny. We're not.
Oh.
We looked at what we had today based on the scope. Keep in mind, these are 30,000 foot numbers. As you peel back and you get the granularity tighter and tighter what you need, could that number jump to 4.2? Yeah. Could it drop to 3.5? Yeah.
Could it go up to 5, 6?
Well, can you tell me what the inflation is for the next 2 years?
Yeah, all we can do is take
3%.
And all we can do is take the information as we have it today and use it to make decisions on it.
Until you bid a project, you won't know for sure. My experience has been in the past that a lot of times architects' estimates hope to come in the middle between the low and the high bidders when you bid a project. You will normally find in a competitive market the prices from the low contractor to the high contractor will vary as much as 10%. Now you ask, how can that be? And it's, we have no control over what prices they put in. And that's why you bid a project so that you get a competitive price and you get the best price at the time. If we'd have done this in 2010, we'd have saved over $1 million. But we didn't.
But you never did have an actual plan, right? Like it was just a building of this size? That price that you initially
It's all based
had.
on estimates until you have a set of contract documents that a contractor can take and get tie down prices for, confirm prices. Your price isn't set until you sign that construction contract.
Okay.
And even then, you have to allow contingencies.
Okay, second question. How long do you expect to take to pay the loan back?
The assumptions I threw on the board was 5% loan at 15 years at 2.4 million. So the answer is 15 years.
Art Seymour, Unit 175. I don't know if I have a question or a discussion to take place here. 2 or 3 things to address the previous comment about the cost of building it. just finishing a building detail now, and we're out to tender. And our tenders came in, and Steve